Thanksgiving Day, 1990, the WWF are putting on their annual Survivor Series pay-per-view and fans settle in for a night of wrestling action. Traditional Survivor Series matches were on the menu inside the Hartford Civic Centre on November 22nd, 1990, featuring the likes of the Legion of Doom, Ultimate Warrior, the Hart Foundation, the Big Boss Man, and Hulk Hogan. But something else was going to take place at Survivor Series 1990 that made fans a little curious. For weeks leading up to the event, we were teased that a giant egg was going to hatch at the pay-per-view. We didn't know what would be inside the egg, but whatever it was, all would be revealed at the Survivor Series. The egg hatching was one of the most hyped up things about the event, and with this kind of hype comes a lot of speculation. Fans at home and fans in the arena waited with bated breath as Mean Gene Okerlund approached the giant egg as it began to hatch live on pay-per-view. And well, what we ended up getting was one of the most ridiculous characters in the history of professional wrestling. Today, we're going to take a look at the Gobbledy Gooker. Leading up to the Survivor Series, the giant egg was brought to TV tapings where Mean Gene would get young fans to speculate about what could possibly be inside. One fan thought it was full of money, one kid thought it was filled with balloons, and this kid here, well, this kid was right on the money.
What do you think, young man, is in that gigantic eggshell?
Turkeys?
Turkey. You know, that makes sense.
Good job, kid. Yeah, everyone knows nowadays what was hiding inside the egg, and there isn't much point building up any kind of suspense here. So let's go straight to the 1990 Survivor Series to take a look at the egg hatching before continuing on with our story. Keep in mind that this thing was hyped up for weeks and weeks, and the hatching of the egg was actually used as a selling point for the pay-per-view. The egg hatching was put into the semi-main spot of the show. Fans were getting ready to see the final Survivor Series match of the evening, but before that could happen, the mystery was going to get solved, and the speculation could finally end. Mean Gene Okerlund tries to get the fans behind the segment. He says that the fans have been hot in Hartford, and thanks to this hot crowd, the incubation period is now over. Gene approaches the egg and he says wherever it came from, it had to hurt. Gene talks about all the speculation as the egg begins to hatch. Could it contain a dinosaur? What about balloons? Okerlund says it could contain the Playmate of the Month, and this gets a huge pop from the audience. And strictly in the interest of research, I looked up the Playmate of the Month for November 1990. It was Lorraine Olivia. Gene gives the cue when he says, "I think that egg is ready to blow," and out pops the Gobbledy Gooker, one of wrestling's most historic creative blunders. The audience begins booing relentlessly and Roddy Piper laughs on commentary. Mean Gene tries to describe what he's saying and the Gooker takes in the negative reaction. This immediately didn't go down well, but Mean Gene does all he can to try and save the segment. Gene must have taken a few lessons in the extremely difficult language of Gobbledy, because somehow Gene understands the gobbles of the Gooker.
The Gobbledy Gook. Ha! Don't tell me you're the Gobbledy Gooker. You've got to be kidding me.
After this introduction, the Gobbledy Gooker drags poor Mean Gene down to the ring. Inside the ropes, we learn that the turkey is actually quite agile. He tumbles around while dancing along with Okerlund, and Mean Gene has no choice but to play along. The cameras try to focus on fans who are actually enjoying this absolute mess. And to give credit, more people begin cheering as the Gobbledy Gooker shows off some cartwheels and flips, but by and large, the whole thing goes down like a lead balloon, and everyone involved, from Mean Gene and the Gooker to the commentary team of Roddy Piper and Gorilla Monsoon, are all forced to act like this is going really well. Gene tries to copy the turkey's slick moves, and you gotta hand it to Mean Gene Okerlund here. He's trying to make the best of a bad situation and he's giving it his all, but I can just imagine the conversation backstage after this all went down. In the end, the Gobbledy Gooker got met with a seriously negative reaction. Things got slightly better after the in-ring routine, but it was a massive flop. It lives on in infamy as one of wrestling's most ridiculous moments. I'll also mention here that the 1990 Survivor Series is well known, of course, for another debut, the debut of The Undertaker. And Mark Holloway legitimately thought he was going to be the one inside the egg. Vince had called The Undertaker a few weeks before his debut, just as the egg segments were airing on WWF television, And when Mark said yes to appearing at Survivor Series without knowing what his gimmick was actually going to be, he immediately thought of the egg. Undertaker said, "About the time I got my phone call, they were doing this promotion. They had this gigantic egg on the set. So I'm at home and I'm trying to think about everything I could do. I'm trying to grow my hair out and come up with a different look, whatever it's gonna take. This egg appears on the show and all of a sudden my mind starts going, oh man, they're gonna bring me in and I'm gonna be Eggman. I'd convinced myself to the point where my stomach hurt." It's interesting that Survivor Series 1990 ended up giving us one of the most legendary characters in the history of professional wrestling and one of the most ridiculous. The Undertaker would go on to have a stellar career with the World Wrestling Federation, and as for the giant turkey, well, things didn't go quite so well, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So what's the story here? Who, what, and why? Well, it's been reported that the WWF wanted a mascot character that would appeal to younger viewers, and this is made obvious by the segments before Survivor Series where kids would speculate what was inside the egg. Having the egg hatch at Survivor Series was your usual cheap way of making people buy a pay-per-view. The mystery would get solved at the event and you would have to pay for the privilege of seeing it. So what happened at Survivor Series because, well, why not? Why waste this colossal character reveal on free TV? The turkey idea was because Survivor Series took place on Thanksgiving Day. It does make you wonder why the WWF thought a turkey could be a consistent mascot on any given day of the year following Survivor Series, but yeah, turkey it is. Let's not ponder about the creative process too much, because God knows what they were smoking back in 1990. We can't overlook the San Diego Chicken either, a radio station and sports event mascot who rehatched from an egg back in 1979 to show off his new feathers. The man who played the chicken, Ted Giannalis, was fired earlier in the year, and when he made his big comeback after a lawsuit, he was brought out to the Jack Murphy Stadium where he hatched from an egg. This looks like direct inspiration for the WWF and the Gobbledy Gooker, and I think it's safe to say that many fans, particularly those in the San Diego area, maybe knew that the egg at Survivor Series contained some sort of mascot. It wouldn't be a stretch to presume so after the trials and tribulations of the San Diego Chicken. The man who played the Gobbledy Gooker, though, is way more interesting to look at. Under that costume was one Hector Guerrero, a member of the illustrious Guerrero family that includes his father Gory Guerrero, and of course, brother Eddie Guerrero. Hector Guerrero had been wrestling since the mid-70s and he was absolutely no slouch in the ring. He had a high-flying style that served both as a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing because his style was exciting to watch, and it's a curse because it also suited a mascot who could do flips and cartwheels for no apparent reason. Dusty Rhodes recommended Hector to Vince McMahon, and initially Hector wanted nothing to do with the World Wrestling Federation due to an unfavourable encounter with a road agent, apparently. Still, Hector relented. He listened to Vince McMahon's pitch for the mascot character, and he agreed to try it out. The idea here was that the character would also begin wrestling after a few months. Guerrero got the gig after showing what he could do inside the costume, and Hector said the only vision he had was through two small holes that were drilled into the giant bulging plastic eyeballs of the turkey mask. This would cause problems and effectively it would also end the illustrious run of the Gobbledy Gooker. Hector made a few live appearances in the costume while the World Wrestling Federation was on the road, but a show in Madison Square Garden ended up being one of the final appearances for Hector Guerrero as the Gooker when he fell over when flipping into the ring. Hector had difficulty seeing due to the poor vision the mask already provided, mixed in with the lighting in MSG. And rather than me talking about the incident, we'll listen to an interview Hector took part in where he explains the whole incident. A big thanks to the two-man power trip of wrestling for letting me use this audio. Check the description for a link to the full interview.
They were going to showcase the Gobbledy Gooker that night at the Madison Square Garden. But we never rehearsed it. We just did it with me because I could do it really good. You know, they knew that I could do the routine. But they were going to turn off all the lights and then shine me with a white bright light, with a spotlight all the way up to the ring. And I said, okay, no problem. But we didn't try it. So what happened was, when they turned off all the lights and they put that bright light on me, I couldn't see anything. All I could see was white. I was blind, bro.
Oh,
and
man,
these guys
that's
are
terrible.
pushing me and shoving me. You understand? The guys behind and the curtains there, you're on, man, you're on. Go, go. And I'm trying to tell them, I can't see. And they're shoving me, man, and I'm tripping over the wires. So I'm already out, and I could hear the people screaming. So oh my God, I'm already out. And all I can see is white. And so I start, I don't even know. I kind of felt the ring, what do you call it, the TV wires, and I could feel them that way. So I started feeling with my foot all the way there. I finally feel the ring, and I start looking for the steps. I can't see anything. All I can see is white. I try to go up the steps, and I skin my knee. I skin my shin. I'm bleeding now. I'm hurt. I do a flip in. All I can see is white. I land on my bottom rear end. I get up and I said, what do I do now? I landed on my rear end, this is a flop. So I started acting like funny, like it hurt my hip, and started grabbing my hip and moving my hip, and acting funny. And then they turn on the lights. I'm talking about they took that big shiny light off of me. Finally I can see, and now I can see the arena. So now I do my whole routine, and I flawless, I did it the whole thing. Everything else that was left, I flawlessly did it. It came back in. Boy, I walked into the dressing room, and I'm looking and Vince is looking at me. He's not happy to look at me. he was not happy, and he's looking at me. He's giving me very dirty looks, and I'm going, oh my God, I wonder if he knows. And I was going to say something about it, but then he walked away.
Let's step back for a moment and think about this. Vince McMahon was annoyed that a guy in a turkey costume fell over when doing his routine. Was there anyone on the planet who was taking the Gobbledy Gooker that seriously? Who at all cared in Madison Square Garden, with the exception of Vince McMahon, if the turkey mascot fell over when getting into the ring? In all seriousness, there was absolutely nothing lost when Hector fell over here. It added to the comedy, and I'm also pretty sure that this was supposed to be a light-hearted character that was aimed at children. I just find it incredible that McMahon would get annoyed about this instead of laughing it off backstage while giving Hector a big old slap on the back. Gorilla Monsoon understood. He approached Hector afterwards, knowing full well that Hector couldn't see because of the lighting in the arena. Guerrero didn't even have to tell Monsoon. Gorilla already knew, so even if the guy falling over was a big deal, people knew that Hector was in a tough spot and it really wasn't his fault. Also, Guerrero saved it afterwards with the silly dancing and holding his hip. To me, it just added to the routine, but Vince McMahon was taking this one very seriously, and he got annoyed about the fall. Hector got another month out of the character before it was scrapped. Hector said the company paid him well, but he was completely pushed out of the WWF following the demise of the Gobbledy Gooker. Hector said the company did try to contact him a few months afterwards, but he missed the call. He called back, but it was eventually decided that he didn't have a future with the company. Had he picked up the phone call the first time around, then things maybe could have been different. But years and years later, the giant turkey would make a return, and once again, Hector Guerrero was under the suit. WrestleMania 17, 2001, stars of yesterday are brought back for a giant over-the-top rope battle, and there he is. Hector Guerrero played the role of the Gooker once again on the biggest stage the WWF had to offer. Mean Gene was there once again, only this time Gene called the action from the commentary table. The match starts, and the giant turkey was one of the first participants who got eliminated. Easy come, easy go. Even though Hector would never play the character again in WWE, the Gobbledy Gooker did make appearances down the road and, get this, he even won championship gold. The character was used in a comedy role. He was featured in a few kickoff shows during Thanksgiving periods over the years. He was used at a few Survivor Series shows. And also, he was featured on Edge and Christian's WWE Network show, the Edge and Christian show that totally reeks of awesomeness. The new Gooker's biggest achievement though was winning the WWE 24/7 Championship during the Survivor Series 2020 kickoff show. Our turkey friend was brought to the show by R-Truth, but the Gooker turned heel and he pinned Truth, resulting in the Gobbledy Gooker entering the record books as a winner of the coveted 24/7 Championship. During the main Survivor Series show, Akira Tozawa pinned the Gobbledy Gooker to claim the title, only for R-Truth to then pin Tozawa and leave Survivor Series as champion. The Gooker would also appear shortly afterwards on WWE Main Event, where he ended up getting taken out by the Retribution stable, and that was the last we saw of the character. It's been reported that Drew Gulak played the role of the Gooker during this time period, and this is interesting because Gulak also made a brief appearance as the Gobbledy Gooker back in 2017 on the 205 Live show. He took off a mask here during the segment and he called himself the Gobbledy Gulaker. And well, he must have done a good job because he was back in the costume just a few years later. It seems like the WWE just can't let go of the character as he continues to make appearances, and this makes us believe that Vince McMahon, for whatever reason, just likes the Gobbledy Gooker. Usually it's a current superstar hiding under the costume, but nonetheless, it goes to show that the gimmick still lives on. Sure, it's a big old joke and the WWE pokes fun at itself anytime the Gobbledy Gooker makes an appearance, but it also proves that people never really forgot about the character. Maybe that's because we've never been given the chance to forget about the character. It was incredibly ridiculous for sure when the Gobbledy Gooker made an appearance at the 1990 Survivor Series. It's ridiculous how Vince McMahon thought his comedy character falling over deserved to feel the wrath of McMahon himself. And it's a little ridiculous how the character keeps coming back around November time, making it seem like the WWE have no other ideas for promos and segments centered around Thanksgiving. But the Gobbledy Gooker has become legendary for being so downright silly, and the gimmick lives on in infamy, along with the likes of the Shockmaster, Mantar, and Bastion Booger. Clearly, the giant mascot was never supposed to be taken seriously. It was lighthearted and goofy. But in a strange way, and I think this is the big takeaway here, even though this stuff was supposed to be silly, the WWF or WWE can still find ways to totally mess it up. For the Gooker, it was the whole egg hatching thing. I don't think anyone would have cared about the World Wrestling Federation having a traditional mascot, but the fact that it hatched on pay-per-view after weeks and weeks of speculation meant the Gobbledy Gooker was completely screwed from day one. This could have been a thing that was silently added to events and not given a whole lot of fanfare. Never mind a giant pay-per-view selling reveal segment that was doomed from the very start. There's no defending it really. It was horrible then and it's still horrible now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at the Gobbledy Gooker. Thank you very much for watching and take care.